Late 1944. A line of German prisoners was being marched down a road behind the American front. They expected to see guns. They expected fuel dumps. They expected ammunition crates, wrecked vehicles, wounded men, the ordinary machinery of an army at war. What made them slow down was steam. Not smoke from a burning tank, not fog rolling off the fields, steam. It was rising from a canvas enclosure stretched between two American trucks. A muddy hose ran across the ground. A water heater coughed somewhere behind the canvas. And outside the opening stood a line of American infantrymen in undershirts, holding towels, waiting their turn like men outside a bathhouse. A military policeman waved the prisoners forward. They kept staring, because the first Americans were already coming out the far side. Their hair was wet, their faces were red from hot water, and on a folding table, a quartermaster soldier was handing them clean socks, clean underwear, and clean uniforms, sorted into piles as calmly as if the war had become a department store. The Germans had been sleeping in their clothes for weeks. Some of them were crawling with lice. Some had not seen dry socks since the retreat began. Their army could barely get bread and ammunition to the right place on the same day. And here was the enemy, heating water. That was the sight they could not explain. Not the tanks, not the artillery, not the planes. A hot shower, close enough to the front that the rumble of guns still reached the road. And underneath their disbelief was a question that mattered more than they knew. Why would any serious army spend trucks, fuel, water, labor, laundry space, and time on comfort when men were dying a few miles away? The answer is one of the quietest explanations for how the United States helped destroy the German army. Because to the Americans, a hot shower was not comfort. It was maintenance, and the Germans had mistaken maintenance for softness. The German army had been raised inside an older religion. Its central commandment was hardness. A soldier was supposed to endure. He was supposed to march farther on less food, sleep in the cold, swallow pain, keep his rifle clean even when his body was filthy, and prove by silence that his will was stronger than the conditions around him. That belief was not fake. It had roots in Prussian discipline, in the myth of the Iron Soldier, in the campaigns where men who could absorb punishment often did win. It shaped officers who believed that comfort was dangerous, because comfort made men expect relief. And men who expected relief might break when relief did not come. Rommel lived that belief more honestly than most. He ate what his men ate. He slept where they slept. He believed a commander had to share hardship if he wanted loyalty. That part was real. Shared hardship can bind a unit together. But the German system carried the idea one step too far. It began to treat suffering itself as proof of military value. Cold became character. Hunger became discipline. Dirt became toughness. Exhaustion became a test of will. And that was the fatal mistake. Because willpower is not fuel. It does not refill the stomach. It does not dry the feet. It does not kill lice. It does not restore reaction time after 3 nights without sleep. The Americans came from a different world, and they brought that world with them. They did not look at the soldier as a spirit trapped inside a body. They looked at him the way an engineer looks at a machine that must keep running under load. If the machine overheats, you cool it. If it wears down, you service it. If a part fails, you replace it. And if the most important part of the weapon is the man carrying it, then you maintain the man. That difference was not obvious at first. In February 1943 at Kasserine Pass, the German army saw the Americans at their worst. Green troops, confused command, poor coordination, columns broken up in the Tunisian mountains, thousands of casualties in a few days. To German officers, Kasserine confirmed everything they already believed. The Americans had money, machines, canned food, cigarettes, chocolate, toilet paper, shaving kits. They had equipment but not warrior spirit. Some German reports mocked the amount of personal comfort material found with American units. Razor blades on a battlefield. To them that said everything. An army that made room for razor blades could not be serious. But the razor blades were the point, not because shaving wins battles by itself. Because the American army had already decided that routine was a weapon against collapse. A man who can shave still belongs to an organized world. A man who can drink hot coffee still believes someone is behind him. A man who receives dry socks before his feet rot is not being pampered, he is being preserved. And by 1944, that philosophy was no longer an attitude. It was a system. When the invasion fleet crossed the Channel in June 1944, the riflemen went first. Behind them came an army within the army. Quartermasters, bakers, truck drivers, laundry companies, water purification teams, fumigation and bath companies, graves registration units. The men history usually skips because they were not photographed charging a machine gun. But they carried the thing without which no attack continues. They carried renewal. The American food system alone showed the difference. The Army did not merely intend to feed its combat troops. It intended, whenever possible, to feed them hot food. Not as charity, as policy. Field kitchens followed units forward. Insulated mermite cans were loaded onto jeeps and trucks, carrying hot stew, beans, coffee, meat, potatoes, bread, whatever the supply line could prepare and move. By the late European campaign, the great majority of rations reaching American combat troops were kitchen-prepared A or B rations rather than cold emergency food. In January and February 1945, the share reached roughly 9 out of 10. Think about the practical meaning of that. An American infantryman could spend the morning under shell fire, crawl through mud all afternoon, and still have a real chance that at dusk a jeep would arrive with something hot in metal containers. Not good food, not restaurant food, but cooked food. Food that said the system had found him. On the other side of the line, a German soldier might be eating cold bread if the ration party had arrived at all. And if it had not, then hardness would have to serve for supper. But food was only one part of the American answer. The part German prisoners remembered was the steam. The U.S. Army had mobile units whose entire job was to keep filthy soldiers from becoming useless soldiers. The Quartermaster Fumigation and Bath Company sounds almost absurd until you understand what it did. A platoon could set up shower equipment, heat water, run men through in batches, and connect the whole operation to a clothing exchange. Men walked in carrying mud, sweat, lice, and weeks of combat stink. They walked out with wet hair and clean uniforms. Their dirty clothes did not vanish into a pile. They were bagged and sent to laundry companies behind the lines, washed, dried, folded, and returned to the stock. The system needed water, a lot of it, tens of thousands of gallons a day for a full company. It needed pumps, heaters, canvas, trucks, soap, towels, spare clothing, fuel, and men who knew how to keep the equipment working when the roads were cratered and the front was moving. And still the Army did it. At one bath point in France, one platoon of a fumigation and bath company served around 1,500 men of the 80th Infantry Division in a day, about 8 miles from the front. Another company supporting major operations could process thousands of soldiers in a long operating day. That number sounds administrative. It was not. It meant thousands of men returned to their units with fewer lice, cleaner skin, dry clothing, and one brief experience of being treated like a human being instead of a thing being used up. That changes a man. Not forever, not magically, but enough for tomorrow. And war is often decided by the Army that has enough men who can still function tomorrow. One of the quartermaster soldiers who lived inside that work was Corporal Benjamin Barry of the 863rd Quartermaster Fumigation and Bath Company. His battlefield was water. His weapon was heat. His mission was to find a supply of clean water wherever the Army stopped, get the shower point running, and push exhausted soldiers through before their units moved again. He later remembered frontline men arriving gaunt, dirty, hollowed out by combat. Then they saw the shower trucks, and, as he put it, they brightened up. That sentence is more important than it first sounds. They brightened up not because reinforcements had arrived, not because the war was almost over, not because somebody gave a speech, because steam was rising from canvas, and clean uniforms were waiting on a table. The German Army would have called that softness. The American Army had built it into combat power. The scale behind that decision was almost impossible for Germany to match. American shipyards produced Liberty ships in numbers that would have sounded impossible a few years earlier. Thousands of cargo ships carried tanks, jeeps, food, ammunition, medical supplies, spare parts, clothing, soap, and coffee across oceans. Once those supplies reached France, they still had to move. After the breakout from Normandy, the Allied armies ran so fast that the supply lines stretched almost to breaking. The answer was the Red Ball Express, an emergency truck network thrown together in days and driven around the clock. At its peak, nearly 6,000 trucks ran priority routes toward the front. A large share of the drivers were African-American soldiers serving in segregated transportation units, men asked to carry the war forward while their own army still denied them equal treatment. They drove through darkness, bad roads, exhaustion, wreckage, and danger. Some drove 16 or 20 hours at a time. They hauled the ammunition, fuel, food, blankets, boots, and spare parts that kept the advance alive. On one day in August 1944, the Red Ball Express delivered more than 12,000 tons of supplies to forward depots. 12,000 tons in a day. That is what the Germans saw beside the roads. Not supply. Weight. An avalanche organized into gasoline cans, ration boxes, tires, uniforms, medical crates, and coffee tins. One German prisoner looked at the American piles and gave the cleanest summary of the war anyone ever heard. He said he knew how they had been defeated. The Americans had piled up the supplies and let them fall. He meant the physical weight, but he had also noticed something else. The Americans were not only shipping what armies were expected to ship, they were shipping proof that the man at the front had not been abandoned. The U.S. military operated Coca-Cola bottling plants overseas. The Navy spent real money and shipping space to produce ice cream in the Pacific. American units pushed coffee, tobacco, dry socks, mail, soap, and replacement clothing forward whenever the machine allowed it. To a German officer trained to despise comfort, this looked unserious. To the American logistics mind, it was brutally serious, because morale was not a speech. Morale was a material condition. It was the moment a freezing man put on dry socks. It was hot coffee in a foxhole. It was bread that had not been frozen solid. It was knowing that if you were wounded, medics, plasma, sulfa drugs, evacuation routes, and hospitals existed behind you. It was the knowledge that the army did not intend to spend you like ammunition if it could maintain you like a weapon. That was the difference. The German army kept asking more from the man. The American army asked more from the system. By the winter of 1944, the German system was failing everywhere. The image of the German war machine is panzers and half-tracks. The reality was horses. Millions of horses and mules served the German army during the war. Many infantry divisions remained dependent on animal transport long after Allied armies had become overwhelmingly motorized. Guns, wagons, food, and equipment moved at the pace of animals that had to be fed, rested, protected, and replaced. When fuel ran short, trucks stopped. When horses died, the line slowed. When rail yards were bombed and roads were cut, the front did not receive what it needed, and the German soldier was told again to endure. Food declined. Boots wore out, replacement uniforms disappeared, bathing became rare, lice spread. Trench foot and frostbite took men out of the line without a shot being fired. A soldier with rotting feet cannot advance. A soldier scratching lice all night cannot sleep. A soldier who has not eaten enough cannot think quickly in a firefight. No officer can order a body to ignore those facts forever. During the Ardennes offensive, German units still attacked with courage, skill, and tactical discipline. That must be said plainly. Man for man, German units could be extremely dangerous. Their machine guns were excellent. Their defensive positions were often better built. Their small unit leaders had years of hard experience. Their counterattacks could be fast and precise. The American army did not win because every American soldier was individually better than every German soldier. That is not true. The American system won because it could keep ordinary soldiers functioning at a level the German system could no longer sustain. A German rifle company might begin the week harder, but after days of hunger, cold lice, bad sleep, uncertain ammunition, dead horses, and no clean clothing, hardness began to rot from the inside. An American rifle company might be less polished in some tactical habits, but it had eaten, it had ammunition, it had trucks behind it. Its wounded had a path backward. Its replacements arrived with boots, weapons, training, and food in their stomachs. Its men had some reason to believe tomorrow would not be worse in every possible way. That belief matters. It does not make a man fearless. It makes him recoverable. Hardness can carry a soldier through a moment. Recovery carries an army through a campaign. That is why the shower mattered. A bath did not destroy a bunker. A clean undershirt did not stop an 88mm gun. A cup of coffee did not win a firefight by itself. But each one returned a fraction of strength to a man who had been losing fractions all week. And the American army had the industrial base, shipping, management culture, medical reasoning, and quartermaster stubbornness to return those fractions millions of times. The Germans saw luxury. They were looking at a replacement system for human endurance. In captured conversations, in prisoner reports, in the private shock of officers who had fought both East and West, a pattern appeared. The Americans were not simply rich. They used wealth differently. They turned abundance into procedure. They treated logistics as a weapon aimed at exhaustion. They did not wait for courage to solve hunger. They moved food. They did not wait for discipline to solve trench foot. They moved socks. They did not wait for ideology to solve filth and lice. They moved bath companies and laundry trucks. This is why the old accusation that the Americans were soft was exactly backwards. Softness breaks under pressure. What the Germans were seeing was not softness. It was resilience made visible. The steam in that field was not a luxury escaping into the air. It was proof that the American system had enough surplus strength to fight the enemy and repair its own men at the same time. That is a terrifying thing to face, because you cannot defeat it by shouting at your soldiers to be harder. There is a cruel truth inside the German idea of hardness. It works until it does not. For one day, hunger can sharpen a man. For 1 week, cold can be endured. For 1 month, discipline can drag the body forward. But eventually, the bill comes due. The body collects every unpaid debt, every missed meal, every hour of sleep stolen by lice, every mile walked in wet socks, every fever ignored, every wound treated late because the evacuation system failed. When that debt comes due, the soldier does not become purer. He becomes slower, then sick, then careless, then wounded, then captured, then dead. The Americans did not abolish suffering. Their soldiers froze, bled, panicked, broke down, and died in enormous numbers. No shower point made war clean. But the American army understood something its enemy had confused with weakness. A human being can endure more when the system gives back some of what war takes away. So return to the road. Return to the German prisoners in their filthy uniforms, watching American soldiers step out of a canvas shower with wet hair and clean socks. The prisoners thought they were seeing waste. They were seeing doctrine. They thought they were seeing comfort. They were seeing combat power before it picked up a rifle again. They thought an army at war should spend everything on killing. The Americans had learned that an army also has to spend resources on keeping its killers alive, alert, and sane enough to continue. That was the part the German system never fully solved. It could produce brave men. It could produce skilled men. It could produce men who endured conditions that should have broken them, but it could not restore them at the scale the war demanded. The United States could, not perfectly, not elegantly, often wastefully, often inefficiently, but massively, repeatedly, relentlessly. The hot shower was only one symbol of a much larger machine. The bakery truck, the laundry bag, the dry sock, the mermite can, the Red Ball convoy, the Liberty ship, the water purification unit, the quartermaster corporal who found a stream, fired the heater, patched the hose, and kept the line moving while the guns thudded in the distance. Those men did not look like the point of the war. But when the fighting dragged on, they became the reason the point could keep moving. The German prisoner who said the Americans piled up supplies and let them fall was closer to the truth than he knew. The supplies did fall. They fell as artillery shells. They fell as gasoline into tank columns. They fell as food into exhausted bodies. They fell as clean socks onto freezing feet. They fell as hot water over men who had begun to forget what clean skin felt like. And by falling that way, day after day, they crushed an army built on the belief that willpower could replace maintenance. It could not. The final lesson is not that comfort wins wars. Comfort alone wins nothing. The lesson is colder than that. The army that lasts is the army that understands what a soldier costs after the uniform is issued. Not just bullets, not just orders, not just courage. A man costs food, sleep, heat, medicine, clothing, water, and the stubborn institutional belief that he is worth preserving. The Germans tried to build the hardest soldier. The Americans built the system that could keep a tired soldier standing one more day. And in the end, that was the difference. Because the last soldier standing is not always the one who can suffer the most. Sometimes he is the one with dry socks, hot coffee, clean skin, and an army behind him that refuses to let him rot before the battle is over.